Hey Smarties, good morning. We're going to talk a little bit about timelines today, and why they matter in a few different news stories. Hope you have your coffee or maybe something stronger depending on when you're watching this today. I was thinking about how time passes. Before the pandemic, I never actually drank a solid cup of coffee. Now I'm a professional. As time passes, we change, and the time is important here for a few different reasons. Yes, we're getting closer to the end of the year. And what I want to talk to you about is what's going on in Washington, D.C., how it impacts your life in a few different ways. So you've likely heard a lot about this infrastructure bill. You maybe have wondered why we haven't talked a little bit more about it. I've been waiting to see when the president would sign that bill into law. That's how a bill becomes law. The president signs it. There can be ways that even if the president doesn't sign it, that a bill can become the law of the land. But we don't need to get into that right now. What we need to know is that the Senate and the House passed this bill, but the president hasn't signed it yet. And that has raised some questions from those that are supporters of it because they want to get moving on the money that's a part of this bill. Big things to know about it. It's $1 trillion plus legislation. Some of that is new spending. Some of it is previously allocated spending. So that's important to know. And you might see headlines that are describing this as bipartisan legislation. That is also true and not providing enough context. So it is bipartisan in that both Democrats and Republicans voted for it. You had more Republicans in the Senate vote for it in August than you saw House Republicans vote for it just on Friday night. And so, yes, it's bipartisan, but by a very slim amount. But, we'll take bipartisanship wherever it comes, right? So that's just important to know a little bit about it. Why is the president waiting on signing it into law? This has been a question that the White House has had to answer over the last couple of days. And by the way, he could do it at any moment. So if he decides to do it sometime over the next several hours, by the time you watch it might be the law of the land. But he hasn't so far. And the reasoning for that is that Congress is on a break. The lawmakers that are apparently a part of getting this bill across the finish line are not there. And he wants to do it with their presence. But it is holding up the timeline a little bit. The reason why this is important to note as well is because this is a major infrastructure plan. And we also have that large social spending plan that the White House also wants to pass. When lawmakers come back right before Thanksgiving, they just have a few weeks to work. So what you're up against is a few different things. You're up against the economy, the changing economy. We just got a reading today that says inflation is at a very high level for Americans. Just the important thing to know, if inflation goes up, your dollar buys you less. So we don't want to see inflation go up. That's pressure on the economy that we don't necessarily want. So that's a factor. That's a timeline. We're racing against that potential inflation timeline. You also just have only a certain number of days to work before the end of the year. And Democrats really want to pass this plan. Republicans really don't want it to pass. You still have to fund the government to avoid a government shutdown. So there's a lot of different cross currents to watch here in Washington, D.C. So why does the infrastructure bill matter? Because it actually is pushing money towards roads, bridges, and all the things that you basically use on a regular basis. We are going to have a report later today on our website that's going to give you an idea of why lawmakers, both Democrats and Republicans, would want to vote against that. They both have their own reasons, and so I think it's important to know that. But right now, that bill is just waiting for the president's signature, and we're waiting and watching for that. In the meantime, I want to tell you a little bit about what's a request by Pfizer. So not only do we have the economy, not only do we have a certain amount of work days before the end of the year, you also have a question about where the pandemic is heading and whether or not we're going to see a surge in cases like we did January, February of last year, or a new variant or something else that becomes a dynamic at play. So you have to wonder if timing is an issue for Pfizer raising their hand and asking the U.S. government for emergency use authorization for a booster shot for everybody over the age of 18 in America that's received 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. So you should know that Pfizer previously requested emergency use authorization for a booster, but they were denied for that younger age group, younger than 65, or anyone in just kind of a regular work environment. The United States gave approval for that booster if you're in a high-risk work environment or you're older, if you have pre-existing conditions. And the reason why doctors didn't approve it is that that emergency use authorization is because there was a concern about whether or not there was enough data looking at myocarditis, that heart inflammation, for a certain segment of the folks that received the Pfizer vaccine. So now Pfizer is coming back. They said, we have the data and we would like this booster shot because we believe it pulls back up our vaccine efficacy to where it is normally after you receive a second dose. A couple things to know about this. Just last week, there was an article published in the New England Journal of Medicine out of Israel, study that showed waning immunity in all age groups after the second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. So there was a thinking, well, maybe it's just if you're older, you're more at risk, you're more likely to get a breakthrough case. Well, this study is saying really anyone of any age group, the booster could be helpful to them. So that's one study that's out. At the same time, though, just remember, you also have doctors saying, hey, maybe we need to have a more nuanced approach to vaccinations. I'll give you an example. The Wall Street Journal has an article published by Dr. Marty Makary. He joined us on Smarter News. And one of the things he's talking about is the Pfizer vaccine in kids. He's making the case if your child had prior infection, that this vaccine is not necessary for them. And in fact, he looked at the Pfizer data when it comes to children, and he says that the reinfection rate for anyone with the vaccine or prior infection is still very, very low. So the question is whether or not we're going to get a more nuanced approach to healthcare. Remember, when it comes to health policy, it's a prescription for the whole country overall. But are we moving towards a period where there might be some more nuance? I don't know if this booster shot will get emergency use authorization, but it seems to be increasing that there's different variables. Do you have exposure? Do you have prior infection? Did you get 2 doses of that vaccine or no vaccine at all? And so a question about what we're moving towards. So we'll see when the FDA takes this this request by Pfizer, and what the end result will be. Okay, so we'll watch for that. Speaking of nuance, just want to share this with you. Yesterday, I asked you about how you would describe yourself politically, and you all had some really interesting thoughts. And by the way, in just like one read, you guys are so different. You're so different in so many ways. And it's so cool that you all find a home here. I have something to say about that in a second. But I'm just going to read some of your responses, asking you to describe yourself politically. Callie said she's moderate leaning left. Tricia said she's moderate leaning Republican. Ariana called herself a nomad. Sarah called herself a constitutional conservative. Lydia says she's politically homeless. And my favorite answer when asked to describe herself politically is annoyed. I thought that was a really good one. The reason why I was asking is that Pew Research Group, which is responsible for a lot of the political research that you often see quoted, is coming out with what they've done over the last several decades is a political typology where they try to put people in categories. And the reason why they're saying they're expanding this is that, traditionally Republican and Democrats just don't give you the nuance that you need to talk about political affiliation. So here's their groups this time around. Faith and Flag conservatives, committed conservatives, populist right, ambivalent right, stressed sideliners, outsider left, Democratic mainstays, establishment liberals, and progressive left. So these are the 9 different categories they're using in 2021 to look at the political nuances in America. And you can actually take a quiz to see where you fall here, if at all. This is going to be listed in our newsletter, so you could take that quiz. I'd like to reach out to Pew Research as well. I think it'd be really interesting to see what are their observations after doing this for several decades. What are they finding about the American public, and how nuanced perhaps we are. So just on that, sometimes I look at our comment section, and sometimes, you guys can get a little bit tense, I know. And I saw an amazing moment between two of you just the other day where you both had really great information, and then you kind of ended loving each other, which was amazing. I just want to add this perspective. No matter how many comments we get, there's just a reminder. There's about 194,000 of you on social media on Instagram that aren't saying anything. And the real story is not necessarily about those that are the loudest or have the biggest microphone, but about those that don't say anything, that are the large amount of people out there. And I really identify with that. Sometimes you just watch people 2 sides screaming, and you're like, what about all these people in the middle? What about us, So hopefully you find a home here, and everybody else does as well. And it's just so great to have you guys. So I thought you'd find that interesting, because I know you're curious about the news, and the words that we use matter. The words that we use matter. And so maybe we'll have some different definitions coming. Who knows? What defines a Republican? What defines a Democrat? How would you describe yourself? All right, guys, have a great day. All these stories and more, including the woman responsible for inventing the windshield wiper, on Smarter News a little later today. All right, guys, have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.